Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. New Yorkers produce 14 million tons of it annually. It costs $2 billion a year to gather and get rid of, and the costs are rising. It's shipped to places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. It is a source of environmental degradation, producing massive greenhouse emissions. It's also the source of political conflict. It's garbage. Joining me to talk trash are Samantha MacBride, Sexton, and Omar Freilla. Samantha MacBride is assistant professor at Baruch College's School of Public Affairs, and she's my next-door office mate, a colleague of mine. She was, prior to coming to Baruch, deputy director of the Bureau of Waste Prevention, Reuse, and Recycling at the New York City Department of Sanitation from 2005 to 2012. She is author of the book, Recycling Reconsidered, a new book, 2012. Sexton is the president of the Sexton Company, a sustainability and green branding company. He was Commissioner of Sanitation from 1986 to 1990 and established the first recycling program in a major U.S. city. After leaving government, he became president of the Municipal Art Society and head of the Times Square Bid. Omar Freilla is the founder and coordinator of Green Worker Cooperatives, an organization dedicated to incubating green and worker-owned businesses. Omar has received numerous awards, including the Rockefeller Foundation's inaugural Jane Jacobs Award, the National Hispanic Scholars Award, and the Union Square Award. Welcome, Samantha, welcome, Omar, and welcome, Brendan.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now, first question. I'm going to be the next mayor of the city of New York. I'm moving in from Jersey, establishing residence, and I'm going to become the next mayor. What's your advice? You are my 3 policy advisors. You've got a half hour. What do you tell me? Whisper in my ear or say it out loud.
The very first thing I would say is look at what we call organics, food wastes, yard wastes, decomposable tissues, all of the things that are part of garbage that can become compost and generate usable natural gas as a byproduct. Think about that in a big way, in a citywide way. Think about it from restaurants, think about it from hospitals, from schools, and most of all from New York City residents.
Wow. Brendan.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that you should recognize that New Yorkers are ready. They actually identify with these issues of garbage, recycling, things like composting now. Maybe they always did, but they certainly do now. You don't have to twist people's minds around don't throw that in the garbage. We can do something with that. People understand trash is their responsibility and part of the city life. They don't mind the taxes that go to it and so on. So you can build a community of interest right away, I think, if you dive in. Mayors tend to be afraid of this issue. It's messy, after all. But I believe if you dive in, you'll find alliances out there to make.
Excellent. Omar.
Do not fear the people.
Ooh.
Hey,
be specific.
City government has for too long taken a position that communities are to be feared, that taking any issue that could be seen as controversial to communities is one that you want to avoid. You throw heavy books at people and inundate them with information so that they're too stupefied and fearful to respond with anything. There is a very strong network of community-based organizations, lots of growing information and expertise at the community level about what to do on environmental issues and on the technical level as well. Lots of brilliant ideas that are out there. Don't fear community expertise, community knowledge.
So I go to the boroughs. I go to the Bronx. I go to people like you.
Go to the Bronx, go to Harlem.
In the neighborhoods.
Yeah, go to South Brooklyn. You know, lots of communities that are really aware of what's happening. And great ideas, and lots of opportunities for job potential, job creation and job growth. Really moving towards a decentralized infrastructure instead of big, you know, one silver bullet types of approaches that ultimately backfire.
Okay, so in a sense, a bottom-based approach to
Absolutely.
garbage as a resource and as a problem, if you will.
Which
Do
has
you-
also
go
been
ahead.
a problem, if I can just say so,
Go.
for municipal leaders. Some are open-minded enough to not be afraid of community-generated, but even those who don't have a prejudice against localism and community-based, they just don't. The city's not set up to deal with it. I mean, I'm very proud, actually, of my old department. They're supporting community gardening and community composting now, et cetera. But even there, it doesn't really come naturally to a big, massive bureaucracy like a city government. So it takes a lot of, I believe it takes a lot of encouragement from the mayor or whomever to say, it's okay, we're going to take some chances. This is how the city rebuilt its housing structure. They went to the tenant groups, they went to and not-for-profit housing groups all over. I mean, did wacky stuff, and people wouldn't have believed you would trust these folks with city property, and that's why we have the housing. It's just wonderful.
Trust people with
The
decisions
Bronx is
over
the
their
best
own
example
lives.
of it, actually,
Sure.
but all over the city. I think the same thing for trash. The community gardening movement out there, the folks who are doing composting out there, it's really quite remarkable. But they certainly need encouragement, and I think they'd probably want to hear that they were part of some citywide priority.
Okay, what should be the, go ahead, talk to that issue.
I totally agree with Omar about city government not fearing the people, trying to overwhelm them with data and information, or trying to avoid community input overall. That was certainly my experience when I was at the department. And it needs to be changed. I mean, we really need to have much more of a dialogue and inclusion with cities. I'd like to be proven wrong, however, I have to respectfully disagree with a model of overall waste management, sustainable waste management, where we're not using landfills for the majority of our waste, that is predicated on decentralized community infrastructure. I think with the density and the tonnages that we're dealing with, and having seen the good sides of city government in terms of how waste management is organized to get materials up off the street every day, which is a public health priority, we need to think larger scale infrastructure. Not necessarily one monolithic centralized infrastructure, but infrastructures that are able to absorb the massive quantities of materials that are generated in the city. And I don't believe that community-based organizations have the volume capacity to absorb those tonnages.
Go ahead, Omar, respond.
Well, I did not mean to imply that community-based organizations would have the capacity to actually handle waste. That's not at all where I'm coming from. What I'm talking about is an approach of locations, and saying, you know, typically the city's approach has been, you know, there's something, waste is noxious, waste is dirty, it's something to be avoided. So we need to put it, and that's why it's waste.
Yes.
So we wouldn't, anything that we would, whenever we have a use for something, it's no longer considered waste, it's a resource. So if we treat waste as resources and not view it as something that's waste, but actually something that can be handled in different locations, then we take a different approach. We can say, well, instead of having this one thing located as far out and put it in the communities that have the least ability to fight back, and just stick it in those 1 or 2 or 3 locations, let's treat it as something that could be of benefit to communities all over. And then you have something that can become an amenity, and you can locate different facilities throughout the city. So then it becomes, you know, instead of an incinerator or a landfill, then it becomes facilities where you can actually recover the value of something and upcycle it.
Yeah, I don't think Samantha's point is hardly to be ignored. I mean, we need some massive investments and some massive facilities. I don't mean the single plant has to be big, but there's a lot that will have to be done to handle those tonnage. I was trying to build on, I think Omar's insight was so good, don't fear the people. People don't want the waste in the neighborhood. It's silly to think otherwise. And people will have objections and will have problems and have issues, but we have to engage with them. I think where I started from in this conversation was people are ready to listen. Not all of them will be. Some will fight to the death against any responsible civic response to the waste issue. We're seeing that on the east side of Manhattan right now, the Upper East Side. And not a
With the waste transfer station.
yeah, it's not a plagued neighborhood, but they nonetheless see themselves very much the victims here. So I think that you have to recognize that you will certainly run into some rough spots, but in general, I find that the conversation you have at the community and the political level is in general one where people they have a sense of the shared responsibility. So you might as well sit down and talk to them about it, because they're going to come and talk to you about it anyway.
What seems different about when, for example, when you were the commissioner, and in fact during your tenure, was a consultant to the department on recycling.
Did we pay you?
Yeah, you did. Not extremely well, but
one of the few.
but it was fun. It was very interesting. What you're seeing is new visions and orientations, new conceptualizations out there. You talk about environmental justice. I mean, that wasn't really part of the conversation, or your notion of environmental citizenship.
Ecological citizenship.
Or ecological citizenship and extended circles of responsibility. So it seems that there's an agreement here that the cultural milieu, the mix of ideas out there is different than it has been. Now, what do you do with this new environment? You talked about focusing on organics and removing that from the waste stream and using it as a resource. You've, Brendan, written about renewable natural gas as a resource. Why don't you talk about those things, and then
Can I just ask?
Go ahead.
You have to look at this fairly holistically.
Go ahead.
I think, which is, I guess, everybody's saying the same thing in this part. But for instance, green jobs and green development, or anaerobic digestion, or any of the things where we want to treat the trash as a resource, have to be looked at. It still means you have to bring the trash somewhere.
Right.
And if you're going to be bringing it there in those 1 mile per gallon diesel trucks that I used to operate, the communities have every right to say, get that out of here. You know, I mean, we're bringing just some of the highest asthma neighborhoods.
What do you do?
Well, for one thing, you try to clean up the fleet.
Which the Department of Sanitation, to its
Thank
credit,
God.
is doing.
Yes, they are trying.
What
It's
else?
a big fleet. It takes a lot of money and time to do it. But yes, it has to be a clean fleet. You have to convince people that you really can do fair share, as we called it, that environmental justice is essential. They're all the same concept. And this, so for instance, I mentioned the Upper East Side because in my mind that is the signal case. If you can't put a waste installation up there, don't ask anybody else to take one. That's how I feel about it.
Right.
So you have to look at all, so that's a political and a siting issue, and now it started out with a vehicle issue. Then we're going to talk about getting jobs and the neighborhoods that need the jobs. So I think you have to look at all of this, and you have to talk to people on that kind of intelligent level where you really are looking at it all. And then I think they respect the conversation, and you have a chance of asking them to do something with you about it all, because you're doing what you can.
Okay. We're sort of talking about garbage, but not really sort of defining what we mean by garbage and what the current system is. How much garbage do we produce? What does it consist of, et cetera, and what do we do with it? Just very briefly, what's the current operation?
Well, our most recent statistics are that it's not 14 million, it's down to 12 million tons.
So we've been successful
a year.
in some sense?
No, that's
there's
just
been
a result. That's a result of the, of
Probably
the
a little
recession,
Okay.
as well as a decline in newspapers and printed
Big issue,
material,
yeah.
as well as a result of light weighting and packaging, which is not necessarily a good thing. So
Okay.
weight isn't necessarily a measure of success in any of those cases.
It doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt. A little over 4 million of that is what the Department of Sanitation handles from residents and institutions. The balance comes from the commercial sector, and a lot of that in the commercial sector, as much as 5 million of that is either construction demolition waste or even fill, which is excavation material. And then there is another roughly 3 million that is what's called commercial putrescible. It's the garbage that comes from restaurants and shops and all sorts of businesses.
So we have multiple sources.
That. I mean, with all the guest services, hotels, restaurants, et cetera, in New York, we have a lot of food.
Yeah, and clearly that went to your original point about organics. Now,
Great opportunity there.
Yeah.
what other opportunities are there?
Well, there's the overall opportunity for creating work out of all of this. You know,
Give me an example.
Well, you know, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, they're a think tank based down in D.C. They've done a great amount of research on this, and you know, their studies have pointed to the fact that you could create 10 jobs for every 1 job in the traditional waste sector. You know, and well, all that happens at the end of the day with traditional waste management is, you know, garbage goes out, picked up, handled, trucked to another facility, usually out of state. So that's resources that are lost here. I mean, you have opportunities just in the food scraps. You could recycle that, not recycle. You could compost it. You know, you could create mulch. Or you could create compost that people use in their homes. You know, there are opportunities there for anything from creating berms that are used in ecological restoration. So, you know, people could use it in all kinds of.
Sure. But you need facilities, and somebody has to pay for those facilities, and those facilities need some kind of pass,
these are things that, depending on what it is, you have waste, you have material resource, not waste that's being trucked out, sent out of landfills. You've got a company there's a glass recycling company that makes ice stone. Based down in Brooklyn. Down in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, they make the countertops that, you know, people are on when they're at Starbucks. And they're beautiful, beautiful countertops, glass, full of glass, but they wind up importing glass from Ohio, I believe it is. But that's certainly, we've got plenty of glass generated here in New York City, but because we don't have the facilities, we typically haven't had the facilities to process it and collect it and process it and sort it in the way that it's needed, then that's a resource that isn't available. So certainly on that scale, on the receiving end, you need facilities that are able to do that. But then you also, you need to have the companies that can handle it and can actually create a product out of it. So you need both in order to be able to do that.
Actually, you mentioned one that's kind of a really sad note for me, because we used to use a lot of glass in New York in our street repaving.
Right.
And we no longer do. I'm not sure why. There wasn't economic reasons. We pay a lot for trap rock for the same purpose now in New York, and we did use glass for a while. It was a great program, but at any rate, even the city's exploitation of its own resources could use some tweaking. Let's put it that way.
Go ahead.
Well, glass is a great example of some things that I think we do need a little bit more information about the economics and the quantities.
We need to reconsider
as a
it.
case study, right? Ice Stone set out to take New York City's glass. At the same time, there was enormous pressure on by the environmental community, the mainstream environmental community, to get diversion rates up, to get tonnages up. There was legal pressure on the department. And so the department did, or the city did, what cities all over the country do. They collect glass in a commingled curbside collection.
Because you get the tonnage that way.
Because you get the tonnage that way.
So the numbers, the data drives the policy, or
when
how you connect the numbers.
When you collect glass that way, it breaks, it's dirty, it's incredibly expensive to bring back up to the level that you could introduce it into ice.
So when you don't collect it.
And, well, no, you
They
collect
collect
it,
it.
but you market it at best for low quality aggregate.
Okay.
Moreover, Ice Stone's demand was this, right? And glass was that.
Right.
So the city is not going to invest in, and this is what I'm talking about, the capacity to absorb tonnages. I know why the DOT stopped collecting glass. I went and talked to them about it. It was because the glass was too contaminated with organics. When it was stockpiled before being introduced into their asphalt, it was steaming, it had birds picking at it, and it was also of uneven quality. Again, because curbside collection of glass is an inefficient, stupid idea that was actually, and I talk about this in my book, pushed and marketed by the glass industry and by the beverage and bottling industry. Glass in some of the most progressive cities in the country, including Seattle, used to be, although they've caved as well, but Portland still, they collect glass separately for exactly this reason.
So does Paris, by the way. I just came back from Paris.
Really?
Lucky
Everybody
you,
likes
thank
to
you. I
mention
mean, you
if
had to
get
tell
there,
us
you
that.
have to tell everybody that. But I happen to notice they're very keen on recycling there, and I love the way they handle waste in general there. But they do collect. They actually have single stream recycling except for glass. The glass goes in a separate.
Makes so much more sense.
But I think that's, for me, what this really is that a lesson in the fact that you have to pay attention, you have to really think about these things. We've been so accustomed to thinking of garbage as garbage. Who could think it's a technical issue, an economic issue, a political, you know, they
Social,
just garbage. Leave me alone already.
fairness,
Get rid of
equity.
this stuff,
Right.
you know. So I think what you have to realize is it takes some thought and some work. That's all.
And you know, I think Samantha raised a point here about, you know, the city was dealing with the economics of the situation that was presented with. So ICE can only deal with this much, and you got a need that's this big. But then as a city, we have to ask ourselves, what's the future that we're creating?
Right.
What's the future that we're out to create? And if we're out to create a future for the city that involves, that creates jobs for people in a time when it's needed, and if we're out to create a future for the city that's environmentally sustainable and can be the model for the rest of the world, then it would require that the city actually engage in some of that forward thought and the planning that says, okay, we know this is the market, the local market for glass, and this is the amount we have. What can we do that can actually stimulate the creation of businesses that can actually deal with the rest of that?
It's an intellectual and a political commitment to actually investing yourself and your reputation and your energy in these problems.
Well, let's get the point that you raised is about the absence, perhaps, of real strategic, comprehensive planning. I mean, the two basic documents that govern this are the SWAMP, the Solid Waste Management Plan, which was 2006, and Plan YC. Now, I'm looking at Plan YC, both the original document and I guess the 2011 update, and there ain't much planning here. No. And I don't know, you guys know it much better than I do, the validity of the targets, how they reach them, how they intend to get to them. It seems awful, awful sketchy. Is my perception correct?
From having worked with the tonnages and the composition and knowing them intimately, I would say that Plan YC was designed with very little understanding of that. Yes, the biggest quantity that they talk about in reaching increased diversion rate is through the introduction of basically new generation waste to energy. So not something that we would consider traditional recycling anyway.
Right.
A lot of their other targets and initiatives were premised on some things that have already proven politically infeasible, like charging nonprofit institutions for collection.
Very recently, right?
Off
the table.
Off the table. Some of them.
I think you could do it. If you started with the largest, I don't believe you
Well,
could
I'm going to be the new mayor, so tell me how to do it.
I don't believe you could charge the local neighborhood church for the trash, but you could charge Columbia University. So if you said that anybody who delivers more than 100 tons a month to your facilities, to your trucks or whatever, they have to pay. So
so it's policy feasible.
Omar's called just a minute ago that someone should actually look at the long-term, the climate impacts, the environmental future of the city is absent from these discussions. If you have to say to someone, oh, but I don't want to pay for this, I got it free, you can't just, well, that's true. In fact, you're asking them to do something they didn't have to. But if you're saying, look, within 30 years we have to do this to our carbon footprint in New York City, what is your contribution? That's a different way of looking at it.
Okay, Sarah, Samantha, you going to jump in?
Well, I was just going to add that this institutional diversion plan was also predicated on an unprecedentedly high diversion rate by institutions where they had not been doing so before. So although it was ambitious, it was predicated on something that was very politically untenable without any actual plan about how all of these institutions, large or small, were going to be turned around in a matter of years.
Wait a second, this sounds like a metaphor for city government writ large.
Well, yes. In my reading of Plan YC was that it was put together by people that don't actually work operationally with these issues, but are in the mayor's office and who are sort of studying them theoretically.
Actually, I was impressed that the second generation of Plan YC, I actually liked that there was a Plan YC, I have to say.
Exactly. There's somebody who was looking for it. At least someone
accepted it as a municipal burden that they should be doing some long-term planning. I like that. But the first generation actually essentially didn't mention trash. The second, in fact, I looked for the word recycling. It wasn't in the first.
Wait a second. I did too.
And the second version, the update, whatever it was, in fact started to tackle these issues. And I was so gratified. I felt that it was a major step forward that a mayor and a city administration was saying, okay, this is our job. We're supposed to do something about this.
Right.
So I was very grateful for that.
And the second iteration does have a section on solid waste. What should the goal of the system be, and how do we operationally do it? You're the commissioner. Structurally, how do we do it?
Well, again, you have to look holistically. I'm glad that Samantha pointed out that the city has tackled this issue of the clean feet, for instance. One of my heroes over there, Rocky DeRico, is running some wonderful trucks.
Yes.
But you have to do it. You have to engage with the community, as Omar's asking, at the lower level, and you have to look scientifically at the upper level for technologies that you believe can work, like anaerobic digestion or others.
Which leads to this renewable natural gas that
Yes,
we
that
alluded
one
to
does. It
earlier.
also, I thought you were going to say it leads to these issues with the communities, which it does. But
Yeah,
you
it
have
does.
to engage
Right,
in them.
right.
You have to sit down with your neighbors and say, this is a big deal. We've been talking about it for 20 years now. The city's already spending the money, so it's no longer that issue. It's no longer a budget issue because we're spending too damn much on trash as it is now. We're spending it wastefully. To coin a
Wastefully, oh,
phrase.
that's good.
And so the money's already there if we can divert it to some things that are more useful, perhaps. And some of it, of course, some of what we want to do saves money. There's no question.
Omar, last words.
There are opportunities for creating jobs, not just creating jobs, creating businesses. There's a great organization in the Bronx called Green Worker Cooperatives, which I happen to know something about.
Yes.
That
Brag a
is-
little
Founded
bit.
and
Tell
directed
people.
it.
that is all about supporting people, teams of people who want to start up worker cooperatives, worker-owned businesses. We would love to see people starting up businesses that are based in recycling, composting, reusing, reducing waste. So there are opportunities that are there. Those opportunities would be lost if the city took an approach that continued to waste those resources, that went towards the route of waste-to-energy facilities or any others that would basically consume the very energy-rich resources that we have.
Okay.
So opportunities are abound.
Samantha, you've got the last word.
I'd like to argue in thinking strategically and for the future of just sustainability in New York City that we need to take into account questions of scale and not throw out the notion of larger scaled approaches, given the fact that we have such a massive tonnages here, while still recognizing community and the incredible importance of community in all ways. And I guess the one thing I would suggest then is to let's take the leap and think about commercial waste, residential waste, and institutional waste as one potential source of materials.
Instead of the separate
yeah.
streams. Okay.
Yes, good point.
My thanks to Brendan Sexton, Omar Freilla, and my colleague Samantha MacBride for being on the show. See you next week here on CUNY TV. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.